Did you ever imagine Lindsey Graham, Cory Booker, and Sam Altman all agreeing on something? Me neither. Apparently, all Congress needed to bring them together was a common enemy, AI. Yesterday, the Senate held a 3-hour hearing with OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, a retired NYU psychology professor who kept saying that AI frightened him, and an IBM lobbyist who somehow was supposed to be highly relevant to a conversation about regulating generative AI, even though IBM isn't even on the generative AI company landscape. And don't make any mistake, just because the Senate and House hearings on AI are just starting doesn't mean that regulations aren't already being drafted. In fact, numerous times during the hearing, senators mentioned how, due to their multiple long private conversations with Sam Altman, they trust his moral character and technical recommendations on how to regulate AI. And his primary recommendation on how to regulate AI was to create an AI regulatory agency that would require AI models beyond a certain size to be licensed. How will that affect AI companies and public access to AI models? That's what I'm going to talk about today. If you're new here, I'm Ricky, and this is Axiom Alpha, a podcast for ambitious capitalists. And ambitious capitalists should care about AI regulation for 3 reasons. 1, every new regulatory scheme is an opportunity for entrepreneurs to create compliance-focused software and consulting businesses, and those can be highly profitable. 2, new regulations and licensing requirements can lead to regulatory capture, which improves investor returns on incumbent businesses. And 3, AI regulations, if overly burdensome, can slow down innovation, which can make younger AI ventures less profitable, and eventually can slow down the growth of the entire economy, and potentially slow down the growth of the US economy relative to some of its competitors like China. So let's take a look at what aspects of AI are likely to be regulated first. The most repeated concerns from senators during yesterday's hearing were 1, misinformation, especially related to elections and healthcare. 2, intellectual property rights, especially related to the use of copyright-protected works that are used to train generative AI models, and there are numerous ongoing class action lawsuits about that already, some against Midjourney. And 3, safety, a catch-all term that was used numerous times to refer to everything from child safety to non-proliferation of AI that can design novel biological agents to not encouraging self-harm. Now, I thought it was interesting that healthcare misinformation was brought up as a concern at all, because pharmaceuticals, surgery, and other physical healthcare treatments are already gated by doctors and pharmacists. You can't get them unless those professionals are willing to give them to you. That means if an AI diagnoses a patient with a false positive, the harm is limited to the cost of an unnecessary doctor visit. But if an AI accurately diagnoses a patient with an issue that the patient would have just ignored if the alternative was an expensive doctor visit, then the AI would have produced a substantial benefit for that person. That means AI healthcare should actually be a huge benefit to society in net. And if you're worried about the AI giving false negatives, then just implement a simple regulation that requires medical AIs to give advice biased towards false positives and away from false negatives. That's a much simpler regulation than what the Senate and its expert NYU professor witness suggested yesterday. So let's get into what the actual solutions were that the Senate did consider yesterday. There were 5 main types of regulatory systems that they considered for AI. Solution number 1, proposal: nutrition labels for AI. These would be required consumer disclosures about what data a model was trained on and how it scores on various bias benchmark tests. The idea is, similar to a supplement label, you want to know what goes into a model. Second proposed solution, FDA-like clinical trials. AI models would be subject to clinical trial-like testing before they could be put into production. That would encompass both the use of that system, what is the proposed benefit, and what are the risks, and which of those is greater. Are the risks acceptable given the benefits? A third-party scientist or group of scientists may also be required to participate in auditing the AI models to ensure safety standards were met as part of those clinical trial-like conditions. Proposed solution number 3, a federal right of action. This would be a statute that goes beyond simply clarifying that Section 230 doesn't apply to generative AI companies. It would also preempt states and ensure that anyone who is harmed by a generative AI company could sue them in a federal court. Proposed solution number 4, AI copyright rules. Copyrighted works could not be used to train generative AI models without the copyright holder's permission. Now, it's uncertain currently whether or not copyright holders' rights are being violated when a company like Midjourney trains on copyrighted images. That's currently being litigated. But Congress is saying hey, we can make that explicit. We can modify the copyright laws, and that's already been done in the past. There's precedent for this. The Millennium Digital Copyright Act modified copyright rules at the beginning of the century because computers needed to replicate copyrighted images in a limited degree. And so the copyright law was modified to say, hey, if a computer is just hosting a file or it's transferring a file, it's okay as part of its internal computer operations to make a limited number of copies of that file to do certain things. Not for monetizing it, just to execute a certain type of functionality. So there's precedent for modifying the copyright law, and now the Senate is considering whether they should modify the copyright law to explicitly say, hey, if you are training an AI system, you cannot use copyrighted material. I think that has a moderate chance of passing. It seems somewhat popular. Anyway, that's proposed solution number 4. Finally, we have proposed solution number 5, which is a new AI regulatory agency. This agency would require licensure of any AI models above a certain scale of computational power, number of users, and or abilities. What exactly would those abilities be? Unclear. Sam Altman did suggest a few things, such as the ability to influence a user's behavior and or the ability to design novel therapeutics or novel biological agents. I personally think that's a quite poor threshold. For one, I actually worked on AI systems in grad school that designed novel biological agents. They were not nearly as sophisticated as OpenAI's system. In fact, what does it even mean to design a novel biological agent? There is a lot of software that can just permute through various DNA combinations and run a basic physics energy simulation to estimate whether or not that will be a stable compound, that whether or not a protein that comes from a given strand of DNA will be stable, and whether it will have a certain type of functionality. Now, the accuracy of those systems is not fantastic, but they exist. And so, is that an AI? Is it an AI capable of designing a novel biological agent? Yes. Is it dangerous? Not really. And we've had them for years. So I think that's pretty poor threshold. And what does it even mean to influence a user's behavior? Do you need to do a longitudinal study and see if their election behavior or political posts on social media are affected? Do you need to see if they simply run a different set of queries after they look something up? There's many ways you could say that a user's behavior was influenced, none of which seem very concrete to me, all of which seem highly abusable in a way that would lead to regulatory capture. In other words, large companies co-opting the regulatory agency's licensing model to hold out new companies and retain market share themselves, which is not good for the economy in the long term. Now, the AI regulatory agency was the most discussed solution and was supported by a core group of 5 senators. Senator Michael Bennet, a Democrat from Colorado, Senator Peter Welch, a Democrat from Vermont, Senator Lindsey Graham, a very conservative Republican from South Carolina, Senator Cory Booker, a Democrat from New Jersey, and Senator John Kennedy, a Republican from Louisiana. And those are just the 5 senators who it was very obvious that they supported an AI regulatory agency during the hearing. The hearing did not include all senators, so that's a subsample of all the senators that likely do support it. The fact that Cory Booker and Lindsey Graham both support this idea mean that there are probably many more Republicans and Democrats that also support the idea, because both Lindsey Graham and Cory Booker hold relatively large sway in the Senate. Other senators, including Senator Jon Ossoff, who is the Democrat from Georgia, seem to be seriously and genuinely considering the agency solution. So I would take this idea very seriously. I think there is a very real possibility that an agency will be made to regulate AI. Multiple senators compared a new regulatory agency to a nuclear regulatory agency or to a car regulatory agency after cars were invented, after the automobile was invented. Many different agencies came up to regulate safety of cars. And a lot of senators are saying, hey, AI is at least as dangerous as cars. Shouldn't we have at least one agency that's dedicated to regulating AI? And that is a reasonable hypothesis. However, it definitely could lead to good or bad outcomes. It may be that it does help with safety. It may be that it leads to a lot of regulatory capture and stifles innovation in the US. We'll have to see. However, it's likely that if a new agency is created to regulate AI, the scope of the new agency won't actually be restricted to just AI. There are multiple groups of senators with their own pet bills that they have been trying to pass in recent years to regulate tech companies, and any new agency bill would probably incorporate at least some of these. For example, last year, Senators Bennett and Welch introduced the Digital Platform Commission Act to try to create a new agency that would regulate tech companies. During yesterday's hearing, Senator Welch said that they would be reintroducing that bill this year with AI rebranding. Similarly, Senators Klobuchar, Coons, and Cassidy have their own pet bill, the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act, which would require social media companies to disclose their algorithms to certain researchers for bias analysis. And given that many of the senators and witnesses at yesterday's hearing advocated for various types of data or model transparency for AI, it could very easily be that Senator Klobuchar's bill could be merged with Senator Bennett's bill to create a bill that is a massive conglomerate with sweeping consequences for the entire tech industry, from social media to AI to a random blog even.